First of all, I want to say hello to everyone. It is truly an honor and a blessing to be here. I want to thank God just for allowing me this opportunity to still be able to share what I love to do, and that is to share information on history, particularly African history. Today, we will talk about ancient Egypt and looking at women through the lenses of ancient Egypt, Black women through the lenses of ancient Egypt. This is the EJ Network, and I am so grateful for those of you who have clicked on this channel to hear me talk today about our history. And I hope that what I say today has meaning to you. You may ask, well, what gave me this passion to do this presentation? I must say, growing up as a young girl, there was not a lot of this taught in school. And, we hear about ancient Greece, we hear about ancient Rome, the Byzantine Empire. We hear about all of these different empires in the West, and that's a good thing, right? So we need to know these civilizations, but sometimes when we don't know our history, sometimes there are things in our lives, it can leave us empty in a sense. Not that we're depleted, but it's just something that the whole story is not told, right? And then when they do tell the story, sometimes it's not given in a way of true honesty, okay? And so today I want to introduce my presentations to all of you who are watching today and those who may watch later on, a little bit about what I would bring to the platform. And I think that the best presentation to do that is with this presentation dealing with ancient Egypt and looking at Black women in the ancient world. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay, and before I begin, I do want to read this disclaimer, copyright disclaimer under section 107. All right. Allowances is made for fair use for the copyright disclaimer. Allowances is made for fair use for the purpose such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. Okay. So now, reflections of Black women through the lens of ancient Egypt. Now, many people may look at this portrait and may be shocked that this is a female pharaoh. Now, we know about the male pharaohs, but not many of us growing up know about female pharaohs. And so this is Queen Hatshepsut of the 18th dynasty. Okay, and we're going to know a little bit more about her as we move along. Okay, and so the table of contents, let me make this a little bit bigger for everyone. So this is the table of content for this presentation. All right, and part one is just a brief introduction of Africa, the mother civilization, and then looking at ancient Egypt, right? And then part two, we're going to briefly look at the cosmological and scientific concepts in ancient Egypt. Then part three, we're going to look at Africa, particularly ancient Egypt, as a matriarchal society. And I guess a more proper way to say it is a matrilineal society. And then part four, after we look at all of the really great glories and all of the contributions and wonderful things, we also have to talk about what happened. So then part four, we're going to talk about the fall of Africa and that effect on the Black woman. And then part five is going to be the closing and conclusion. Okay. So now Africa, the mother of humanity and civilization. Now I want to say this. Okay. Before I start, I want to say I do get passionate. Okay. I tend to get passionate. And so please forgive me. Okay. But when I say Africa, the mother of humanity, many people out there would agree. Now, some people would disagree. All right. They say, no, it was in Asia, which is fine. Right. I'm not here to argue. But most people have come to terms to the fact that humanity has its inception, right, its beginnings in East Africa. Many people will say, okay, that's true. All right. And we're not going to really dig deep too much in this presentation. In other presentations, I will. But people don't have a problem with that. Okay. But the problem that people have is if you say civilization. Now, that is an issue because many people will say that Sumer, right, is the origin of civilization. I'm not here to argue with that. I particularly don't see Sumer as the beginning. But if you want to say Sumer is the beginning, those of us who are Bible readers know that that area itself was an area that was inhabited by Black people, right? But for me, I would think, and as we move along in this presentation, you will see my point in why I say Africa is the mother of civilization. So let me move on. So now, as it relates to humanity, okay, this is a book by Robin Walker, one of my favorite books, When We Rule. Please go pick it up and support him. He has really great information and references in that book. But as it relates to humanity and the first people on the planet, people would say that the Twa, the Khoisan, these are some of the earlier people that inhabited Africa. So let me read this. The oldest known skeleton remains of autonomically modern humanity or modern humans, so these are Homo sapiens sapiens, were excavated at 5 sites in Africa. Now, before we look at those 5 sites, I do have an update. Okay, this was not revealed when I was first doing this presentation. So they found some bones that go back, y'all. Check this out, 300,000 years old. That's some old bones, and that was in Morocco. So this is North Africa. We don't really know too much about this area, so I'm just going to put a pause in there for right now, and let's resume with these 5 excavated sites in Africa. Okay, human remains were discovered in Omo in Ethiopia, dating 195,000 years old, which is extremely old. Some people push it to 200,000. Skeletons have also been found in Latoli in Tanzania, Classes River in South Africa, and a border cave in South Africa. Now these, check it y'all, dated from 130 to 110 years old. So these are some very, very extremely old bones, okay? And if you think about these bones that go back 195,000, you know they weren't the first, okay? So it have to be some older than that. So now we know humanity based on bones itself. The oldest is in Africa. So now when we get outside of Africa, okay, according to the resources and When We Ruled by Robin Walker, you have Asia, which is 95,000 years, which is old. You have Europe at 39, and then you have Australia at 32. So we know that humanity, as it relates to the earliest, okay, can be found in places of Ethiopia, which is in East Africa, okay, South Africa, all of this in Africa, East Africa and South Africa. So that's important to note, okay? So now here's just the remains, the 195,000-year-old bones in East Africa. And here is the bones that were found in Morocco that goes back to 300,000 years old. And look, it's just like a straight line. It's almost like they walk from here to there or there from here. I'm just talking, y'all. I'm just making it up right now. All right, so now let's look further. So being serious, Ethiopia, the mother of Egypt. Okay, now I know how people feel about me saying that. Ethiopia, the mother of Egypt. Some people would disagree with that statement. Okay, but let's read. A number of scholars, both ancient and modern, okay, have come to the conclusion that the world's first civilization was created by a people known as the Ethiopians. Now, for those of you who may not know what Ethiopians mean, the name Ethiopian we owe to the ancient Greeks when the Greeks came in contact with the dusty inhabitants of Africa and Asia. They called themselves the burnt faces. The Greek word for burnt is ethios, and the word for face is ops. So ethios plus ops became Ethiopian. And these quotes come from the book by Anthony T. Broder. And please, y'all look, I have everything in quotes, and then I have the source down here. So these are not my words. I do source my content. Okay, and this is Ahmose Nefertari of the 17th dynasty. And this is the great grandmother of Hatshepsut, the first woman that I showed you in this presentation. And I want you to look at her skin. She is an epitome of that word Ethiopian. So when people say that that ancient Egypt was not a Black civilization, when it comes to the ancients, they say that they were. And we're going to, look more into that as we move along. So further into how can we continue to prove that ancient Egypt was a Black civilization? Of course, here's another really good book by Yosef Ben Yochanan, Africa, Mother of Civilization. Okay, the ancients also refer to both Egyptians. Let me go back. I'm getting excited. And Nubians as Ethiopians. So we know Nubians are Black, right? Because we have the 25th dynasty. That's when the Nubians were the pharaohs. But to the ancients, they didn't see no difference, right? They saw the Egyptians and Nubians as Ethiopians, as the burnt faces. Yet, if there is a country and people in history that should receive the most malign or ridicule award, it is Nubia and the Nubians, the so-called Negroes. Why? Egypt and Kush share identical writing, culture, gods, agriculture, science, medicine, and at various times, they also shared common heads of state called pharaohs. Now, when some people get to this information about Nubia and that relationship they have with Egyptians, that does cause some people to feel uncomfortable. And that's the reason why Dr. Ben put it in his book. So now we briefly just talked about, them being Black, and, of course, Herodotus and other people have shared that in their writings. But how old is this civilization? Is it younger? Is it older? Some people have different dates, but this is a date that came from the book African Times by Kilimanjaro, which is also a really good book. And this is what he had to say in his book. Africa's civilization developed along the Nile River among the interior of the African continent. So in other words, it was the interior that the African civilization developed, not the other way around. So going back to at least 4,300 to 3,686 before Christ, okay, you have this emergence of the National Federation under Menes or Norma. Okay, so this is Norma right here. Now, if anybody, see, here's the thing. When you look at this person, when you look at this statue, and if someone's, without knowing that this is Egypt, and they would ask me, if they would have asked me, where did this brother come from? First of all, I know he's a brother, meaning he's of African descent. I would say Congo, Nigerian, right? But he is an Egyptian, probably has his lineage somewhere in Nubia, right? So that's, this me just hypothetical, but at the same time, faces and statues, they speak for themselves. So now let's look more. So we know the dates, but let's look more into ancient Egypt and this Black civilization. Now this information comes from the book Black Genesis, the Prehistoric Origins of Ancient Egypt. Okay. The origin of cosmological and scientific concepts. And this is the Stonehenge in the Sahara. Now, you think about it, the Stonehenge that we have in Europe is very old. I think it goes back to like 5,000 or so BC, which is really old. But as I began to do this research, I come to find that there was some Stonehenges, right? Or that predate the one that we have in Europe by 2,000 years at least. So SMU archaeologists discovered several stone rocks in a calendar circle formation, tracking the movement of the stars. So now that showed you right there that these people had some sense of intelligence, all right? They know and they knew how to track the stars. Carbon-14 dating resulted and dates as far back as 7,000 before the Common Era, and as recent as 3,400 before the Common Era. Now, Robert Bauval believed that they were tracking the Orion constellation that goes back 7,000 before the Common Era. So this is in the Nubian desert. Okay, so this also gives more of, I guess you can say, more of a source, of where these people began to develop this science and this knowledge. It didn't start in North Africa. It didn't start in Egypt, but you can begin to see the science develop in Nubia itself, which I think is key. Now, this right here is some of the remains. Now, here's the thing that's unique. If you ever read the book and you look at this, you say, okay, this is somewhat impressive, but underneath this, y'all, is actually bigger rocks. It's huge rocks that weighs a lot, that we can't even imagine. But this here goes back to at least 7,000 before the Common Era, which is amazing. And of course, I have this graphic here just showing the stars itself. Okay, so now we introduced and we talked about Nubia. We talked about the fact that there's a Stonehenge that goes back to 7,000 before the Common Era. So now let's look more into the origin of the cosmological and scientific concepts. So now I'm a Christian, okay? And so it helps for me to understand things a little bit when I put it in Bible terms, in a sense, okay? But how many of you know that there are some similarities between what we read in the beginning of the Christian word of God as it relates to creation and some of the things we find in ancient Egypt? So let's look at this. In the Bible, and this is Genesis 1 through 2, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the waters. Okay. Now, if we look at ancient Africa, and particularly we're looking at ancient Egyptian, okay, a cosmological and creation story, you will see some similarities. Okay. And I want to bring this up, we got to, and I don't want to get too deep into this, but we have to remember that Moses was in ancient Egypt. So he learned a lot about the cosmological concepts. And so it would not be unheard of if he brought some of that information to his people, okay, to the Israelites themselves. And this comes from Gary Greenberg, president of Biblical Archaeologically Society in New York. All right, so he says, they have a word in ancient Egypt called hu and huhet. Now, I want to say this to the ancient Egyptians, because we're talking about women today. I don't want to lose their focus. There was always this balance that we don't see in other parts of the world during this time. So if you have a male, you have a female pair. You have a male and a female pair. You never have a male by himself without a sister or a brother, So there's always these opposites that's complementary. Okay, so hu and huhet, that is the unformed space within the deep. So we talked about that deep, right? So that these both male and female, the male is hu, the female is huhet, they're the unformed space, as described in Genesis as tuhu and buhu, in the original Hebrew meaning without void or form. So I want you to also notice the similarities in the word, okay? And then the next thing is ku and kuket, which is the darkness or the face of the waters that we talked about in Genesis 1 through 2. And then lastly, we have Nun and Nunet, which is the primordial flood, the deep, the same as the biblical deep. So we have these similarities between the Egyptian cosmology, not only in what it means, but also the sound are also similar. So now we have Nunet, Neter, the primordial waters. Now, why is this important? Nu and Nunet, if you read the book by Jeremiah, is feminine. Okay, now we about to go somewhere today. Okay, we're talking about women and how women were viewed in ancient Egypt. You can't understand how women were viewed in ancient Egypt without understanding the cosmological concepts. Okay, so now we understand that to the ancients, when we talk about this primordial water, okay, this primordial water has a feminine aspect to it. And of course, I have this water just for the effects, right? So let's look more into this. Now, this comes from the Women's Encyclopedia of Myth and Secrets by Barbara G. Walker. Okay, and this right here is the symbol of Nu. Okay, the power of Nu was the self-created maker of nature, the creator of man. She existed before the sky, the earth, and mortals. From Nu, the sun was born. Therefore, Nu and the great mother were one and the same. So now we beginning to go somewhere, because I know in the beginning I was talking about humanity and it started in Egypt, and now we know that they were Black. Now we're talking about the cosmological concepts, and we know that Nu has a very important role to play in how ancient Egypt looked at the world, okay? So now Nu also has a counter concept, all right, or another term, and that is Net. Okay, Net is another aspect of this cosmological story. And so she is the principle of weaving. Okay, you might say, now, what does that have to do with cosmological concepts? And so let's look at this. We know that cloth weaving was a feminine task, both from surviving ancient scenes as well as representation of Egyptian goddess Net. And this is the patroness of weaving. And this comes from his book, Charles Finch, Echoes of the Old Dark Land. Okay, so now let's look more into this. So we talked about Nu, she's a primordial water. She was there before men. Now we're talking about Net, she's weaving. What are they talking about? Okay, her Egyptian name, Net, means to weave. The word Net also means that which is or being. So that Net, as Net, is quite literally the fabric of existence. So the fabric of existence is self, the thing that makes everything together. To the ancients, had a feminine aspect. Okay, all right. And so this concept was applied to how not only they saw the world, but how they saw women in a sense as well. Okay, and this also comes from Echoes of the Old Dark Land by Charles S. Finch. And I please, sometimes I'm gonna try to remember, but please look down at my source, because these are not my words. Okay, now this is, of course, the cosmos, and I want to read something to you as you look at this beautiful picture before you. And again, I encourage everyone to get the Women's Encyclopedia by Barbara G. Walker. It's a great source. And so I want to read page 721. So please bear with me. And this, again, is getting more understanding of Net. Okay. And this is what is translated to the ancient Egyptians about who she is and how she sees herself. Now, this is what they say. I have come from myself. She was the world body, the primordial abyss, which was the sun's first rose. Okay, and the cow gave birth to Ra. She was the spirit behind the veil. And so, in other words, Neth was this powerful symbol, okay, to the ancients. She was just like Nu, kind of in the early stages of the cosmos. Now, I want to say this as it relates to cosmological concepts. They're not talking about people, okay? They're really talking about science. They're talking about science, and they're not talking about a person, a real person named Neth that went out and created this. No, they're just talking about a principle, okay? So now we talked about Net. Let's get back to Nu, okay? You say, all right, so you took us to Nu, now to Net, okay, we're back to Nu. All right, and all of this, believe it or not, has a very important understanding of Black women and women in general, okay? So now we talked about how Net gave birth to herself. So we know women give birth, Okay, so the ancients had that concept. They never seen a man give birth. So if anything gives birth, it has to have a feminine principle. So Nu, just like Net, gives birth. Okay, so Nu, who did she give birth to? And remember, this is not a human. This is a cosmological, scientific concept. So Nu, right, this primordial existence. Let's read. She gives birth to Atum or Adam. Okay, so Atum is what the Egyptians called it. It is the Adam that we call today. So the Atum of the ancient Egyptians was a scientific concept that we picked up, that the Greeks picked up. Okay, so Atum, which permeates and exists in all matter, described as creative vibrations, divine utterance, the moving power of the spoken word. And this comes from the book, The African Genesis, Amazing Stories of Man's Beginning by Barashango. Okay. And if we look at this, to me, this is just, I kind of like, and this is the source of the animation. I really like looking at this. If you can imagine the background as these primordial waters, okay, and then from it emerges this atom. All right, this is pretty deep stuff, right? And so you think about, man, you know, the ancient Egyptians were thinking this deep back in what, 4,300 before the Common Era, before Christ. I mean, that's an amazing thing to note. And so let's look deeper into this, okay? Because we know that Atum, and let me go back real quick, all right? Before I move there, because I want to make sure that you understand that Atum, it says it's the words, okay, the utterance, okay, and we know that words and utterance have vibration, okay. So now we go to this next one, and let's look further into this atom, okay. Atom and string theory, okay. So atom, if you look at it from a scientific perspective, and you might say, okay, now how is this talking about women? Please just bear with me, all right? So atom have quirks, which then have these vibrational strings. So when someone says that atom speaks, in a sense, it does have a vibration. And that's all words is vibrations. And so atom itself speaks. So let's look at this. Carbon atoms are made of protons, neutrons, and electrons. The protons and the neutrons are made of up and down quarks, which may in turn be vibrating strings or string theory. And this comes from Ted Mark in his book, Our Mathematical Universe, My Quest for the Ultimate Nature of Reality. All right. And of course, these quarks come from this source down here. So now, what did we learn? So Nu gives birth to Atom. Okay, atom is the atom that makes up the universe. We are all made up of atoms. It vibrates, right? And so now that we have atom, let's look at the Egyptian family tree. So Nu and her children in ancient Egypt, and I put Kemet, that's just the word that they call it, but I don't want to lose anybody today. So let's just say Egypt, right? So we have Atum at the top. And again, even though we see these figures and he's human, we got to keep in mind that this is cosmological. This is not talking about humans, okay? So you have Atom at the top, all right? And then Atom, which is the atom that we have in our science books, gave birth to Shu and Tefnut. Now, Shu is the wind and Tefnut is the moisture. Okay, then they came together, and I want you to notice how everything has a male and a female. You don't have male, 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 and female, female, but we know that as it relates to creation, right, from a human perspective, it takes men and women to give birth. Okay, so they have Geb and Nut. So Geb is the earth to ancient Egypt, okay, and Nut is the sky. And then they came together, all right, and they have Nephthys, Osiris, Isis, and Set, okay? And then of course, we have Anubis and Horus, but we really don't want to get that deep today. And I don't want to get that deep into the family tree, but I just wanted you to see how even to the ancients, they understood how atoms creates different things, right? Just like our atoms create us, it creates the water, it creates the air, it creates the sky, it creates everything that we can see has atoms, okay? So now I want to focus, and I put a box here on Nut, because we're talking about women today, right? So we talked about Nu. Now let's look at Nut and how that relates to women. All right. So a closer look at Nut. Now this is a Nut, and I can't particularly say which wall this is on in ancient Egypt. I should have looked into that. I don't know if I have it over here, but just looking at this is some interesting stuff going on, and some really great artistic work from the ancients. So Nut gives birth to the sun god daily. So now this right here, if you can see, is the sun going through Nut, okay? And he passes over her body during the day before being swallowed at night, only to be reborn the next day. Okay, so remember, Nut is the sky, and you see the sky up here. So to the ancient Egyptians, when they saw the sun, rising in the east, it was like rising in Nut, rising in the sky, and then it was set in the west, and it would just be reborn. So it was this cycle of rebirth that was going on. The son went back into the mother Nut's great gates in the west when he died. Okay, Nu became the Semitic Nun, primordial sea, personified as a fish goddess. And that all of this can be found in Barbara G. Walker's book, The Women Encyclopedia. Okay, so that's very important, because we're talking about how the ancients looked at women, and how they view women was based upon their cosmological concepts. All right, how they saw Earth, how they saw women, and how they related to the cosmos was very powerful to them. Okay, so now let me go back. So now the next person we're going to talk about is Iset. All right, so we talked about Nut. So now let's talk about her daughter, right, in a cosmological scheme, Iset. Now Iset is also very powerful concept that exists to the ancient Egyptians. Iset is the seat and the throne. Now, remember that the sun goes through Nut. Okay, so they saw that the sun was going through Nut daily. Okay, and so in order to have a king who was seen as a personification of Ra, okay, or Horus, which is also a sun, he has to be on the throne of the feminine, okay? Because remember, the sun goes through the feminine, okay? And we're talking about some things that I don't want to go get too deep today. But here, this is the 18th dynasty depiction of Iset, okay, and Asar. Now, what's interesting is that this right here that you see, Iset itself is the throne. So when we say the word seat, or we about to sit down or set, how many of you know that that word actually comes from this word? It's pretty cool. So he is literally sitting on her throne as a king, as a son, which is pretty cool. Okay. So now let's look more into the lap of Iset. And let me get out here real quick. Let me see where I'm at. I'm on 24. So I may stop today and pick up. No, you know what? I'm gonna stop at the next one. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish this one. So let me go ahead and get back to the slides. So now let's look more to the lap of Iset and the throne of power. She symbolizes the matrilineal system first developed by Africans. So Africans are the first people to develop this matrilineal. Okay, so now I don't want to lose anybody. So how did they get this matrilineal identity, and how did they begin to have this concept? It started with the cosmos, observing the cosmos. It started there. Then it transferred to us. Okay. So this matrilineal system started from the cosmos and how the sun gave birth daily and how women give birth. Okay. So a baby being born is seen as like a son, or being born from Nut. Okay. So they saw this connection. In ancient African societies, the king's throne was referred to as his mother's lap, because it is through the female line that he receives power. And the king was not a king until he had been anointed by the queen. Now, the queen, okay, has a connection to Isis. Okay, so she was like the personification of Isis, which we know is representative, okay, of the throne, representative of Nut, all of these things kind of in one. Okay. African women were earthly manifestations of the divine mother of all creation. So now this right here is Iset, Isis, and young Pharaoh Seti at Abydos. Okay. And the source is African Woman, the Original Guardian Angel by Barashango. Okay. And we see that he is actually sitting on her lap. Okay. This gives him authority. Okay. When the kings sat on the throne, it gave them authority to rule. Okay. So now I want to end it with this note: the woman and the cosmos. And I've been talking about it this whole time, but I just want to just hint in on this. The cosmos represented, let me see if I can move this. The cosmos represented the feminine principle of creation to the African Egyptians / Nile Valley people. Therefore, to the ancient Egyptians, the woman was an earthly representation of the cosmic principle. Just like Nu gave birth to Atum, women gave birth to humanity. Okay. And with that, I'm going to stop today. I want to thank you for all of you. We're going to pick up with the Matriarchal Society. This is a female Dahomey warrior of West Africa. She's definitely a fierce woman. Okay. And we're going to look more into that as we move on. So I want to stop sharing. And so today we talked about, briefly, we talked about early humanity being in Africa. We talked about early humanity and then ancient Egypt as a Black civilization. And I know many of you may say, well, you know, I didn't really get deep into that. With this presentation with Black women, I don't get deep. But in other presentations that I have after this one, I get very deep into that. And then we also talked about the cosmological concepts and how that gave women and how they viewed women based upon that principle. Okay. And how the queens and the kings was based upon that principle, and how women in general benefited from the men having that understanding and concepts. Okay. Because in the next part of this presentation, we're going to see how women in that time period in ancient Egypt had more rights than women in other places, because they had that concept, because they saw the benefit of men and women, because they did not have just a strictly patriarchal ideology, but they saw, because of the cosmos and how God created the cosmos, how God created the world, that women had an important role to play. And that's the point I wanted to show today. You know, the unfortunate thing sometimes is with YouTube, I, you know, when I do my presentation, when people have questions, I really, you know, like to hear people come in and clear up some things. But today is my first day. And so hopefully I'll get better the next time. And so when we pick up, I'll have more. And I want to thank you again for listening to me. I love this information. And then you know, today is the 30th. And so I'm planning on being back tomorrow. But if not, I hope that all of y'all have a wonderful holiday and that God bless you in this new year. Okay. All right. Bye bye.